We all know someone who is in denial about being sick. Maybe it's the coworker who sounds like he's coughing up a lung, or maybe it's the elderly parent who refuses to give up sweets even though she's diabetic and they make her blood sugar skyrocket. We all know someone who refuses to accept reality. They're sick. And then there's that one person who brings their sick kid over to your home who's supposedly germ-free after a 24-hour bug. Then, for the next month, your family is quarantined as you pass around a stomach virus like a horrible gift. And we all have a general idea of what we need to do to get well too. Rest, take our medicine, and eat the right diet. Take me, for example. I know I should do a lot of things to get more healthy. I should exercise more, and I realize that the day after I've been working in the yard and I try to get out of bed. And I should eat better. I realize that after a night at the buffet. But there's something so comforting and habitual about my less than stellar choices. I like my sofa. I like French fries. And I will choose the less than stellar choices over the better ones every time. Not because I purposefully want to sabotage myself, but I choose them because they're comfortable. And even sometimes when they make me miserable. Whether or not we realize it, we all have a tendency to act the same way when it comes to getting well in other areas of our lives too. There's this tendency for all of us to resist being made well. And I don't mean well as in physical health, but in the sense of knowing what is wise or best and doing otherwise. You know, just because we know something is good for us, just because we know something is the right thing for us to do, it doesn't mean we're gonna do it. Maybe you've experienced what it feels like to be burnt out. You've worked too many hours and neglected to care about yourself. And I bet someone close to you suggested that you needed to scale back your hours, make some changes, maybe take a vacation, or even see a counselor. But more times than not, we resist, insisting that we're fine. Or maybe you suddenly found yourself single after years of marriage, but because you're so afraid of being alone, you stepped straight into the dating scene, even though friends or family cautioned you otherwise. And why do we do things like that? Why do we fight so hard against doing something we know is potentially for our good? Because even though we know there are benefits, we're not sure they're worth it. The unknown causes us to fear and doubt if the personal cost is worth the potential payout. What if choosing the unknown isn't better? The last few weeks, we've been in a series called Forward Motion. We've been talking through this idea that God meets people where they are and that He invites us to take a step toward a different way of life. We're going to continue to look at the Exodus story, the story of God meeting people in Egypt and inviting them out. We're going to pick up the story when God's people experience a miracle. And pay attention because you're going to see them fighting against what God has in store. But first, let's back up. The Exodus story, it doesn't begin in Egypt. It actually begins in a place called Midian, where Moses fled to hide after he had killed an Egyptian man. In Midian, God chose to appear to Moses in a very memorable way through a burning bush. While speaking through the burning bush, God told Moses to go home to Egypt to rescue his people out of slavery. Moses listened and went back to Egypt. Here's what I want you to see at first. God met his people in a geographical location. It was Egypt. He wanted to lead them out of one physical location and toward another, out of Egypt and into the promised land. And if you know the story, then you know that God did lead his people out of Egypt. But then they spent around 40 years in the desert before finally reaching the land he had promised to them, the promised land. On one level, this is a story about moving. It's about motion, about how God led his people from one place to another. God wanted to move his people from one place to another because they were in misery. As we've talked about before, God's people had only known life as slaves. They led miserable lives. God wanted to make his people well, so he invited them out of that miserable place. And as the story continues, God did all kinds of things on their behalf to rescue them. He sent the plagues. He parted the Red Sea. But 2.5 months after God rescued them out of Egypt, while they were on their way to the Promised Land, there was a problem. The people resisted God's efforts to make them well. But notice what happens next. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." They don't exactly sound grateful, do they? In fact, they sound very unhappy. They were so unhappy that they wanted to return to their misery and bondage back in Egypt, where they were literally dying. Why? Because at least they knew what they were getting in Egypt. There in the middle of the desert, they didn't know what to expect or what was coming, and it was making them crazy. But they wanted to go back, even though in Egypt there was no way they were getting well. You and I both know the feeling. So often, our tendency is to pick a familiar misery over a new mystery. That's what the Hebrews did. They preferred moving backwards to what they knew rather than to move forward towards what they didn't know. I can't tell you how many times I have talked to someone in a relationship they don't want to be in, but they choose to believe that being miserable is better than being alone. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone who hates their job, but they're not doing what they know they should be doing. But they keep doing it because at least it's comfortable, it's familiar. Misery is an easier pill to swallow than mystery. The miserable place is more comfortable than the mysterious place. That's why trusting God is so hard, because we don't ever get well doing what we've always done and staying where we've always been. Mystery is the only way to get well. Israel couldn't get where they'd never been until they did some things they'd never done. And the same is true for us. We can't get to the place God wants us to go until we get comfortable with the mystery. Until we look down and see we're somewhere we've never been before. If someone is trying to get sober, for example, they need to look down and find their feet in an AA meeting for the first time. If someone is trying to get healthy, they need to look down and find themselves in a fitness center for the first time, or at least the first time in a long time. We have to do what we've never done to get where we've never been. In other words, we have to stand in the mysterious place for a while and trust that it's better than the miserable place. Maybe it's not more comfortable, but it's better. The thing is, it's easier said than done. Something in our nature will always resist the unknown. We, like the Israelites, we want to go back. But the good news is, as scary as mystery can be to us, God never leaves us there. He meets us there in the mystery, in the unknown. This is who He is. Notice the rest of the story. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." Right after the Israelites finished complaining, God provided. He sent bread down from heaven to give them what they needed for every step of the 40-year journey. Then there were instructions about this food. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell, so Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. In other words, God's people couldn't store the extra bread in a pantry. They had to trust that God was going to provide for them the next day and for every step of the journey. They had to trust that He would show up in the mystery. You see, I don't think it was God's intention for this food arrangement to be about bread at all. I think it was about Israel making a decision about who they understood God to be. Was He trustworthy enough for them to leave what was familiar and go somewhere new? Were they willing to trust that He would be there for them today and tomorrow? Were they willing to follow Him, or would they rather stay miserable? Our tendency will always be to resist being made well because our tendency is to prefer misery to mystery. Think about that for a second. What's the area of life for you that you want to change, but every time you try, you rubber band back to the starting block? Where do you prefer misery over mystery? Where is God inviting you to get well? Where is He challenging how much you trust Him and challenging what you think He's like? Because to get where you've never been, you have to do what you've never done. You have to stand in some mysterious place. One step of faith is letting God lead you into the unknown. That mysterious place is going to be different for everyone. For some of you, just finding yourself in a church building is a mysterious place, or joining a small group. You know to move forward, you have to leave a lifestyle you've gotten used to, and it's scary. But to keep doing life the way you always have, it's not working. You need a change, and as unknown as it is, you know you'll never find what you're looking for unless you move from where you are. Don't give up. You're being courageous and going after the change. But for some of you, the decision to try to love someone again after your marriage ended is moving into a mysterious place. You're scared of getting your heart broken, but God wants to invite you to be loved again, and until you step into the mystery, it can't happen. Maybe you're in a mysterious place because you or your spouse recently lost their job, or you were just transferred to a new town. Maybe your kids moved out, and you're a recent empty nester. Or maybe you recently graduated college, and you want to go back. You want life to return to how it was before, but it won't. It can't. The question is, are you going to trust that God can meet you in this new place? Do you believe He can make you well there, even if you don't know what to expect? God is the kind of God who still meets people in the mystery. He provides what is needed in the unknown. He joins you on the journey forward. It's God's nature to meet people with what they need. Do you believe that? That even in the fear of uncertainty, there is a God who wants to provide and wants to make you well? When you begin to trust that, suddenly you'll realize that mystery isn't nearly as scary. At some point or another, we all know what it feels like to be out of our comfort zone and unsure of where to go. Some of us end up there by choice and others by circumstance. The uncertainty doesn't have to be a place of doubt and fear. It can be a place of hope and growth because we can count on the God who always shows up. We just have to be willing to walk towards the mystery, knowing that's where we'll be made well by a God we can depend on.